The quiet Omega. The snow descended in heavy veils beyond the great hall's windows, though Lila scarcely registered the cold anymore. She had grown accustomed to it the same way she had adapted to hunger and silence, and the burden of being unwanted. Her fingers moved with steady purpose, repairing a torn cloak belonging to one of the visiting Luna candidates. The material was exquisite, far superior to anything she possessed, and she handled each stitch with meticulous care. Around her the hall hummed with movement. Dorian Stormclaw, the alpha king of the Frostborn pack, was hosting the annual gathering where unmated she-wolves from neighboring territories came to present themselves. It was a spectacle Lila had witnessed 3 times now, always from the periphery, always with her head bowed and her hands occupied with whatever task kept her useful enough to stay. She was 24 years old and had been with the Frostborn pack for 6 years. Before that, her life had been something else entirely, something she tried not to recall during daylight hours. The memories arrived anyway, typically in dreams, typically when the wind wailed like it did tonight. Omega. More wine here. Lila rose immediately, setting aside her mending. The command came from Ingrid, a blonde she-wolf with ice-blue eyes and a dress that probably cost more than Lila would see in a year. Ingrid was one of the favorites this season, or so the kitchen gossips suggested. She had the proper bloodline, the right connections, and the kind of beauty that made wolves pause and stare. Lila filled the goblet without meeting anyone's gaze. She had learned that lesson early. Omegas who drew attention rarely benefited from it. Honestly, I don't understand why he even allows them at these gatherings, Ingrid said to the woman beside her, not bothering to lower her voice. Omegas should be kept to the work quarters. It's unseemly. Her companion, a dark-haired woman named Sasa, laughed. At least this one knows her place. Did you see the Alpha King earlier? He barely glanced at any of us during the greeting line. They say he's impossible to impress. They also say he's looking for a Luna who can handle more than just ceremony, Ingrid replied. Someone strong enough to manage pack politics and produce powerful heirs. Not that any of us have even met his son yet. They keep the boy hidden away like a shameful secret. Lila's hand trembled slightly, and a drop of wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. Ingrid's eyes snapped to her, sharp and cold. Clumsy creature. Clean that up immediately. Yes, my lady. Lila's voice came out steady despite the hammering of her heart. She fetched a cloth and dabbed at the stain, her movements efficient and practiced. She had become very good at being invisible while still being useful. When she finished, she returned to her corner and her mending, but the conversation had lodged itself in her mind. The Alpha King's son. She had heard whispers about him, fragments of information that painted a picture of a child kept separate from pack life. Some said he was sickly. Others claimed he was violent or uncontrollable. The truth seemed to shift depending on who was speaking. What Lila knew for certain was that she had never seen him, not once in 6 years. That kind of isolation spoke to something deeper than simple protection. The evening wore on. Leila moved through her tasks with mechanical precision, fetching and carrying, mending and cleaning. The Luna candidates preened and postured, each trying to catch the Alpha King's attention. Dorian himself sat at the high table, a massive figure with silver blonde hair and eyes the color of winter ice. He watched the proceedings with an expression that revealed nothing, occasionally nodding when someone addressed him directly, but offering little else. He was handsome in the way of ancient glaciers, beautiful and utterly remote. Lila had seen him perhaps a dozen times in 6 years, always from a distance, always in contexts where she was part of the scenery rather than a person. She knew his reputation, though, fair but fierce, protective of his pack, but ruthless with threats. A widower who had lost his mate years ago under circumstances no one discussed openly. Near midnight, the gathering began to disperse. The candidates retired to their guest quarters, still laughing and gossiping among themselves. Lila helped the other Omegas clear the tables and bank the fires, working until her hands ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion. She was carrying a final stack of dishes toward the kitchen when she heard it, a sound so soft she almost missed it beneath the wind's howl. A whimper, thin and pained, coming from somewhere down the corridor that led to the family wing. Lila froze. The family wing was forbidden territory for Omegas. She knew that. Everyone knew that. But the sound came again, and this time she recognized it for what it was, a child crying. She set down the dishes carefully and moved toward the sound, her heart racing. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners and doorways. She should turn back. She should return to the Omega quarters and forget what she had heard, but her feet kept moving forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. The crying grew louder. She followed it to a door left slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap. Lila hesitated, then pushed the door open just enough to see inside. The room was large and well-appointed, a fire crackling in the hearth. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and carved wooden figures. In the center of the room, a boy sat in a wheelchair, his small frame hunched over as sobs shook his shoulders. He looked to be about 8 years old, with hair so blonde it was almost white and skin pale as snow. His legs were covered with a thick blanket, but even from the doorway, Lila could see the way they lay motionless, the way the chair was built to support a body that couldn't support itself. The Alpha King's son, the child everyone whispered about but no one acknowledged. Lila knew she should leave. Every instinct screamed at her to back away before someone discovered her here. But the boy's crying tore at something deep in her chest, something that remembered what it felt like to be alone and hurting with no one to hear. She pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. They were the same winter ice blue as his father's, but where Dorian's were remote, these were full of fear and desperate loneliness. "Please don't tell," he whispered. "Please don't tell them I was crying. I'll be quiet. I promise." Lila's throat tightened. She closed the door softly behind her and crossed the room, kneeling beside the wheelchair so she was at his eye level. Up close, she could see the tear tracks on his cheeks and the way his hands clutched at the blanket. "I won't tell anyone," she said gently. "My name is Lila. What's yours?" The boy stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was real or some kind of trick. Finally, he said, "Leaf. My name is Leaf." "It's nice to meet you, Leaf." Lila kept her voice soft and steady. "Can you tell me why you're crying? Are you hurt?" Leaf shook his head, then seemed to reconsider. "My legs hurt sometimes. The healers say it's normal, that I shouldn't complain. But tonight it's really bad. And I rang the bell, but no one came. And I just..." His voice broke. "I just wanted someone to come." Rage flashed through Lila, hot and sudden. This child had been left alone in pain, crying for help that didn't arrive. She forced the anger down, keeping her expression calm. "I'm here now," she said. "Can I help? Is there medicine you're supposed to take, or something that usually makes it better?" Leaf pointed to a shelf across the room. "There's a salve. The healers rub it on my legs sometimes, but I can't reach it, and I'm not supposed to try to move without help." Lila retrieved the salve, a clay pot filled with something that smelled of wintergreen and other herbs she couldn't identify. She brought it back to Leif's chair and hesitated. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the blanket. Leif nodded, his expression wary but hopeful. Lila carefully folded back the blanket, revealing thin legs in loose cotton trousers. Even through the fabric, she could see how underdeveloped they were, how they lay motionless against the chair's support. She warmed the salve between her palms, then with gentle pressure began to massage it through the fabric onto his legs. Leif tensed at first, then gradually relaxed as she worked. Lila had learned massage techniques years ago, in the time before, and her hands remembered the motions, even if her mind tried to forget. "Does this help?" she asked. "Yes." Leif's voice was small but sincere. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, Lila working the salve into muscles that couldn't move on their own, while Leif watched her with an expression of wonder, as if kindness was something rare and precious in his world. "Why were you crying?" Lila asked eventually. "Was it just the pain, or something else too?" Leif looked away, fixing his gaze on the fire. "The gathering," he said quietly. "All those she-wolves came to meet Father, to try to become Luna, but none of them asked about me. None of them even know I exist. And I heard them talking earlier, when they thought no one was listening. They said if Father chooses one of them, they'll make sure I'm sent away to a facility for broken wolves." Lila's hand stilled. "You're not broken." "Yes, I am." Leif's voice was flat, reciting something he had clearly heard many times. "My legs don't work. I can't shift. I'll never be able to hunt or fight or do any of the things a wolf should do. I'm a burden on the pack, and everyone knows it." "Who told you that?" "Lots of people, the healers mostly. They don't say it to my face, but I hear them talking. They say Father keeps me here out of obligation, but that it would be better for everyone if I was somewhere else. Somewhere I wouldn't be a reminder of his failure." Lila wanted to find every person who had said such things and make them understand exactly how much damage their words had caused. Instead, she finished with the salve and carefully repositioned the blanket over Leif's legs. "Listen to me," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "You are not a failure, and you are not a burden. Your worth isn't determined by whether you can hunt or fight. There are many ways to be strong and many ways to matter." "That's easy to say," Leif replied, but there was a desperate hope in his voice, as if he wanted to believe her but didn't dare. "You're just being nice because you feel sorry for me. I'm being honest because you deserve honesty." Lila settled onto the floor beside his chair, her back against the wall. "And for what it's worth, I don't think you're broken. I think you're dealing with something difficult, and the people around you haven't given you the support you need." Leif studied her for a long moment. "You're different from the others. The servants and healers, they all look at me like I'm something sad or scary. But you look at me like I'm just a person." "You are just a person," Lila said simply. "A person who deserves kindness and respect just like anyone else." They talked for a while longer. Leif told her about his days, which were spent largely alone in this room or in the library with a tutor who came twice a week. He loved books, especially stories about distant lands and great adventures. He had taught himself to carve wood, creating the small figures that lined his shelves. He was lonely, desperately so, but he had learned to fill his hours with solitary pursuits. Lila told him a little about herself, carefully edited versions of her own story. She described her work in the pack house, the satisfaction of mending something torn or preparing a meal that nourished others. She didn't mention the years before she came here, or the scars hidden beneath her sleeves. Eventually, Leif's eyes began to droop. The pain had eased, and exhaustion was taking its place. Lila stood and helped him settle more comfortably in his chair, tucking the blanket around him. "Will you come back?" Leaf asked sleepily. "Please? No one ever just sits and talks to me like this." Lila knew she was risking serious consequences. The family wing was forbidden. If she was caught, she could be punished or expelled from the pack entirely. But looking at this lonely child, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "I'll come back," she promised. "When I can, I'll come back." Leaf smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Thank you, Lila." She slipped out of the room as quietly as she had entered, her heart pounding, as she made her way back through the forbidden corridor. She retrieved the dishes she had abandoned and finished her journey to the kitchen, where the head cook gave her a sharp look for taking so long but didn't press for details. That night, as Lila lay on her narrow cot in the Omega quarters, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had just set in motion. She had made a promise to a child who desperately needed someone to keep their word. She would honor that promise, no matter what it cost her. She didn't know that in doing so, she had just changed the course of her life and the future of the entire pack. The next morning brought fresh snow and new challenges. The Luna candidates were scheduled to tour the pack grounds, a carefully orchestrated display meant to show them the scope and strength of the Frostborn territory. Lila was assigned to the kitchens, helping prepare the elaborate midday meal that would follow the tour. She worked alongside the other Omegas, peeling root vegetables and kneading bread dough, while the head cook, a stern woman named Ragna, barked orders and inspected every dish with exacting standards. The kitchen was warm, almost stifling after the cold of the rest of the pack house, and Lila found herself grateful for the heat, even as sweat beaded on her forehead. "I heard you were wandering the halls late last night," said Marin, another Omega who worked the kitchens. She was older than Lila, maybe 40, with graying blonde hair and a face lined by years of hard work. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes held a warning. "I was finishing my tasks," Lila replied carefully. "Just be careful, girl. There's been talk about tightening up on Omegas who don't stay where they belong. With all these high-born she-wolves around, the pack wants to make sure we're not causing any embarrassment." Lila nodded and kept working, but the warning settled uneasily in her stomach. She would have to be more cautious about visiting Leaf. The thought of not going back, of leaving him alone again, made her chest ache, but she couldn't help him if she was expelled from the pack. The morning passed in a blur of cooking and cleaning. Around midday, the candidates returned from their tour, their cheeks flushed from the cold and their voices bright with forced enthusiasm. Leila helped serve the meal, moving quietly between tables and keeping her eyes down. "The territory is impressive," she heard Ingrid say to another candidate, "but it's so isolated. I'm not sure I could bear being this far from civilization for months at a time." "The Alpha King seems worth the sacrifice, though," her companion replied with a laugh. "Did you see him out there? The way he moved through the snow, the way the pack members responded to him. Pure power." "If only he'd actually talked to us," Ingrid said sourly. "He's been nothing but polite formalities. How are we supposed to win him over if he won't engage?" Lila tuned out the rest of the conversation and continued her work. She had no interest in the political maneuvering of high-born she-wolves. Her thoughts kept drifting to Leaf, wondering if he was alone in his room right now, wondering if anyone had checked on him today. That evening, after the candidates had retired to the Great Hall for entertainment, Lila finished her assigned tasks as quickly as possible. She waited until the other Omegas were occupied, then slipped away toward the family wing. Her heart hammered as she made her way down the forbidden corridor. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential witness. Every sound made her freeze in terror of being discovered. But she reached Leif's door without incident and knocked softly before entering. Leif's face lit up when he saw her. "You came back. I thought maybe you wouldn't, or couldn't." "I promised," Lila said, closing the door behind her. She crossed to his chair and knelt beside it, automatically checking his expression for signs of pain. "How are you feeling today? Did anyone come to help you with the salve?" Leif's smile dimmed slightly. "The healer came this morning. She did the treatment, but she didn't talk to me. She never does, just comes in, does what needs doing, and leaves again." Lila felt that familiar flash of anger but pushed it aside. Anger wouldn't help Leif right now. "Well, I'm here now, and I'll talk as much as you want. What would you like to do this evening?" Leif's eyes brightened again. "Could you read to me? I have a new book about the old kingdoms before the pacts formed. I've been trying to get through it, but some of the words are hard." "I'd be happy to." They settled into a comfortable routine. Lila pulled a chair close to Leif's and opened the heavy tome he indicated, its pages yellowed with age and its binding cracked from use. She read aloud about ancient wolf kingdoms and the wars that had eventually led to the pack structure they knew today. When she encountered words Leif didn't know, she explained them patiently, and when he had questions about the history, she answered as best she could. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the room, and outside the windows snow continued to fall in thick curtains. For a little while, Lila could almost forget the precariousness of her position, the danger of being caught here, the weight of all the things she was trying to escape. They were halfway through a chapter about the formation of the first northern pacts when the door opened without warning. Lila's heart stopped. She looked up, the book falling from her nerveless fingers, and found herself staring at Alpha King Dorian Stormclaw. He stood in the doorway, massive and imposing in the flickering firelight. His silver-blonde hair was loose around his shoulders, and he wore simple clothes rather than the formal attire he'd had on during the gathering. But there was nothing simple about the way he filled the space, the raw power that radiated from him even in stillness. His ice-blue eyes moved from Leif to Lila, and his expression shifted from surprise to something harder, something that made Lila's wolf instinct scream at her to submit, to make herself small and unthreatening. She stood quickly, her chair scraping against the floor, and dropped into a deep bow with her head lowered. "Alpha King, I apologize. I was just leaving." "Were you?" His voice was deep and cold as winter wind. "And what exactly were you doing here in the first place? This wing is forbidden to servants." "I know, Alpha King. I'm sorry. I heard—" She cut herself off, unwilling to explain that she'd heard Leif crying, that no one had come to help him. That felt like a betrayal of the boy, an exposure of his vulnerability to someone who should have already known about it. "Father, please don't be angry with her." Leif's voice was small, but steady. "I asked her to come. I rang for help last night and no one answered, and she heard me and came. She helped with my pain, and then I asked her to come back and read to me. It's my fault, not hers." Dorian's gaze shifted to his son, and something flickered across his face too quickly for Lila to identify. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. "You rang last night?" "Yes, Father. My legs were hurting badly. I rang the bell, but no one came. And then Lila heard me crying and helped me with the salve." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dorian's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an edge that made Lila's skin prickle with instinctive fear. "No one answered your bell. It wasn't a question. but Leaf nodded anyway. It happens sometimes. I know everyone is busy. That is unacceptable. Dorian crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside Leaf's chair, his large hands gentle as he checked his son over. Are you in pain now? No, Father. Lila helped me with the salve, and it's much better today. Dorian's eyes cut to Lila again, and this time she saw something different in them. Not anger exactly, but an intensity that made her want to flee. You know how to apply the treatment. Properly? Yes. Alpha King. Lila kept her voice steady with effort. I learned massage techniques years ago. I was careful to warm the salve and work it into the muscles gently. And you've been back tonight to read to him. Yes, Alpha King. He asked me to come back, and I couldn't refuse. The moment the words left her mouth, she realized how they sounded. An Omega couldn't refuse a direct request, but that wasn't what she'd meant. She'd come back because she wanted to, because leaving Leaf alone had felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. Dorian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and gestured toward the door. Come with me, Leaf. I'll send someone to help you prepare for bed. But Father, now, Leaf. There was no arguing with that tone. Lila's stomach twisted with dread as she followed Dorian out of the room and down the corridor. He led her to a study she'd never seen before, a room lined with maps and weapons and shelves of books. A fire burned in the hearth, and the windows looked out over the snow-covered training grounds. Dorian closed the door behind them and turned to face her. In the enclosed space, he seemed even larger, even more overwhelming. Lila kept her eyes down and her posture submissive, every instinct telling her she was in serious danger. Look at me. The command was absolute. Lila raised her eyes slowly, meeting his winter ice gaze with effort. Up close, she could see the lines of strain around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, though he carried himself with the authority of someone much older. What's your name? He asked. Lila, Alpha King. How long have you been with the Frostborn Pack? 6 years, Alpha King. And in those 6 years, you've never been to the family wing before last night? No, Alpha King. I know it's forbidden. I wouldn't have entered except that I heard Leaf crying and no one was coming to help him. Dorian's expression darkened. Tell me exactly what happened last night. Lila recounted the events carefully, leaving nothing out. She described hearing the crying, finding Leaf alone and in pain, helping him with the salve. She explained that he'd asked her to return, and she'd agreed because he was lonely, and she couldn't bear to refuse him. When she finished, Dorian was silent for a long moment. He turned away from her and stared out the window at the falling snow, his hands clasped behind his back. My son's bell is connected to the healer's quarters, he said finally. If no one answered, it means someone ignored a direct call for help from a child in pain. Lila said nothing. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound like criticism of his pack systems, and she had no right to criticize anything. You said you learned massage techniques years ago, Dorian continued. Where? The question caught her off guard. She'd been careful for 6 years, never to discuss her past, never to give anyone reason to ask questions about where she'd come from or what she'd left behind. But lying to an Alpha King was unthinkable, and the truth felt like it was being dragged out of her by the sheer force of his authority. I was trained as a healer's apprentice, she said quietly, before I came here. And why did you leave that position? Lila's throat tightened. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, despite the winter cold seeping through the windows. I had to leave my previous pack. The circumstances were difficult. Difficult how? She couldn't answer that. The word stuck in her throat, tangled with memories she'd spent 6 years trying to bury. Her hands began to shake, and she clasped them together to hide the tremor. Dorian turned back to face her, and his expression had shifted into something that might have been understanding. You don't have to answer that, but I need to know if you're a danger to my son. I would never hurt him, Lila said, and the words came out fierce despite her fear. Never. He's a good child who deserves better than to be left alone and in pain. Something flickered in Dorian's eyes again, that same brief flash of pain or guilt. He does, he agreed quietly. And yet I failed to ensure he receives that care. The admission surprised her. Alpha Kings didn't usually acknowledge failures, especially not to Omegas. I've been focused on pack politics, Dorian continued, his voice taking on a bitter edge, on finding a Luna who can help me navigate the increasingly complex relationships between territories, on maintaining our strength and our borders. And in doing so, I've neglected to ensure my own son receives the attention he needs. Lila wanted to say something comforting, but she had no right to comfort an Alpha King. She remained silent, waiting for whatever judgment he would pass. Leif likes you, Dorian said. I haven't seen him smile like that in months, maybe longer. He's easy to like, Alpha King. He's intelligent and kind, and he tries so hard to be brave even when things are difficult. Yes, he does. Dorian moved to his desk and leaned against it, some of the formal authority dropping away to reveal the exhausted father beneath. His mother died when he was 3, a hunting accident. She was pregnant with our second child, and we lost them both. Lila's chest tightened with sympathy. I'm sorry. Leif's condition developed a year later. The healers say it was an illness that damaged his spine, left his legs paralyzed. He'll never walk, never shift. For a wolf, that's... In most packs, they would have exposed him, left him to die as a mercy. That's not mercy, Lila said before she could stop herself. That's murder. Dorian's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. I agree, which is why Leif is still here, still alive, but keeping him safe has meant keeping him hidden. The other packs see disability as weakness, and weakness as an opportunity to challenge our strength. I can't afford for them to know about Leif's condition. So he lives alone, Lila said quietly, hidden away like a shameful secret, with only healers who treat him like a task to complete rather than a person to care for. Yes, the word was heavy with regret. I thought I was protecting him. Instead, I've isolated him. They stood in silence for a moment, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Lila could feel the weight of Dorian's exhaustion, his guilt, his desperate love for his son tangled with his duty to his pack. She understood that kind of impossible choice, the way circumstances could force you into decisions that tore at your soul. I want you to continue visiting Leif, Dorian said finally. Lila's head snapped up in surprise. Alpha King? He needs someone who will treat him like a person rather than an obligation. Someone who will sit with him and read to him and help him when he's in pain. You've done that, and he's responded well to you. Dorian's gaze was steady and assessing. I'm assigning you as his primary caretaker. You'll be moved from general pack duties to attend to his needs specifically. Thank you, Alpha King. Lila's mind raced with the implications. This was an enormous change, a responsibility that felt both terrifying and right, in a way she couldn't explain. There are conditions, Dorian continued, You'll report directly to me about his care and his needs. If he's in pain or distress, I want to know immediately. You'll maintain his privacy. Absolutely. No one outside of necessary personnel is to know details about his condition. And you'll continue to teach him, to engage his mind. He's bright, and that brightness shouldn't be wasted. I understand, Alpha King. Good. Dorian pushed away from the desk and moved toward the door, then paused. Lila? Yes, Alpha King? Thank you for helping him last night, for hearing him when no one else did. The words were simple, but they carried a weight of emotion that made Lila's throat tight. She bowed her head in acknowledgement, unable to trust her voice. After Dorian left, Lila stood alone in the study for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. She'd expected punishment, possibly expulsion. Instead, she'd been given a position of trust, been assigned to care for the Alpha King's son. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong step would send her tumbling into darkness. She made her way back to the Omega quarters slowly, her mind churning. The other Omegas were already asleep, their soft breathing filling the cramped room. Lila lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the dim light from the banked fire. Tomorrow, everything would change. She would move from the Omega quarters to a room near Lef's, would spend her days caring for a child who desperately needed care. She would be closer to the Alpha King, subject to his direct oversight and judgment, and she would have to be constantly vigilant, constantly careful, because the secret she carried couldn't be exposed. The scars hidden beneath her sleeves, the trauma buried in her past, the real reason she'd fled her previous pack 6 years ago. All of it had to remain hidden, because if anyone discovered the truth about what had been done to her, about what she'd survived, it would destroy the fragile safety she'd built here. Lila closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Outside, the wind howled like wolves singing to the moon, and the snow continued to fall in thick curtains, burying the world in white silence. The weeks that followed passed in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Lila moved into a small room adjacent to Leaf's chambers, a space far nicer than anywhere she'd lived in 6 years. It had a real bed with thick furs, a window that looked out over the forest, and a Werewolf fireplace she could tend herself. More importantly, it gave her immediate access to Leif whenever he needed help. She fell into her new duties with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before everything had fallen apart. Her mornings began with helping Leif through his exercises, carefully working the salve into his legs while they talked about his dreams or the books he was reading. She brought him breakfast and stayed to eat with him, something that clearly delighted the boy. Afternoons were for lessons. Lila discovered that Leif had a quick mind that absorbed information like a sponge absorbs water. They studied history and mathematics, language and strategy, and Leif flourished under the attention. Evenings were for reading. The two of them would curl near the fire while Lila brought ancient tales to life with her voice. Sometimes Dorian would join them, settling into a chair to listen while he handled correspondence. Those moments felt strangely domestic, almost like a real family, and Lila had to remind herself not to get comfortable, not to let her guard down. But it was hard to maintain distance when Leif looked at her with such open affection, when he laughed at her jokes and asked her opinion on everything from military strategy to what flavor of sweet bread he should request from the kitchens. It was harder still when Dorian watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something that made her pulse quicken and her wolf stir restlessly. 3 weeks after her reassignment, the first real complication arose. Lila was helping Leaf with his morning exercises when she heard raised voices in the corridor outside. She recognized one of them immediately, the sharp, cutting tone of Sina, the Omega, who'd made Lila's life miserable for 6 years with her casual cruelty and her aspirations to catch the Alpha King's attention. "It's completely inappropriate," Sina was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the door. "An Omega of her status shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the family wing, let alone given private chambers and direct access to the Alpha King's son." The Alpha King made his decision. That was Aininga, the head of household staff, her voice firm but weary. "It's not our place to question it." "But don't you see what she's doing? She's positioning herself, trying to use the boy to get close to the Alpha King. We all know what she wants." Lila's hand stilled on Leaf's leg. The boy was watching her face, his expression troubled. "Don't listen to her," he said quietly. "She's just jealous." "I know." Lila forced her hands to resume their gentle massage, though her stomach had twisted into knots. It doesn't matter what she thinks. But it did matter, because Sina had influence among the Omegas, and gossip spread through the pack like fire through dry timber. If Sina decided to make Lila's position here a problem, she could make life very difficult. The voices in the corridor faded as the two women moved away. Lila finished Leaf's treatment in silence, her mind racing through possible complications. She'd been so focused on caring for Leaf, on this small bubble of safety she'd found, that she hadn't considered how it might look to others. An Omega rising above her station, given privileges and access that others envied. "Lila?" Leaf's voice was tentative. "Are you worried about what she said?" "A little," Lila admitted. There was no point in lying to him. Leaf was too perceptive, and he deserved honesty. "But I'm more worried about you. If people start questioning my presence here, it might cause problems for you too." "Father won't let them cause problems. He chose you to help me, and what the Alpha King decides is law." Lila smiled despite her anxiety. "You're right. I'm probably worrying over nothing." But she wasn't worrying over nothing, as became clear that evening. She was returning from the kitchens with Leif's dinner tray when she encountered Sina in the corridor. The other, Omega, was dressed in a gown far finer than anything appropriate for daily pack duties, her blonde hair elaborately braided, and her face painted with subtle cosmetics. She was clearly preparing for the evening meal in the great hall, where she would position herself to catch Dorian's attention as she'd been doing for months. "Well," Sina said, blocking Lila's path, "look at you, playing at being important. Do you really think this will last?" "I'm just doing the job I was assigned," Lila said, keeping her voice neutral. "Excuse me. I need to get this food to Leaf before it gets cold." "Leaf," Sina repeated, her tone mocking. "You use his name so familiarly. Tell me, does the Alpha King know how comfortable you've made yourself in his son's chambers? How you've wormed your way into a position of trust?" "The Alpha King assigned me to care for his son. That's all I'm doing." "Is it?" Sina stepped closer, and Lila caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something sharper, something that smelled like malice. "Or are you using the boy to get close to the Alpha King himself? Everyone knows you're alone with him in the evenings, sitting by the fire like you belong there, like you're someone special instead of just another broken Omega running from her past." Lila's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "Oh, did you think no one noticed? You arrived 6 years ago with nothing. No references, no pack willing to vouch for you. You were desperate and half-starved, and we took you in out of charity. But we all wondered what you were running from, what you did, that made you so eager to disappear into the lowest position in a new pack? I did nothing wrong." The words came out harder than Lila intended, her wolf rising with defensive anger. "And my past is none of your concern." "It's the Alpha King's concern, though, isn't it? Especially if he's trusting you with his son. I wonder if he knows what secrets you're hiding, what scars you keep covered." Lila's heart stopped. Sina couldn't know. No one knew. She'd been so careful, always keeping her arms covered, always changing in privacy, never letting anyone see the evidence of what had been done to her. But Sina's smile was sharp and knowing. "You're not as careful as you think. I saw you last week when you were washing. You turned and your sleeve rode up, and I saw the marks, old burns, weren't they? And cuts, the kind of scars that tell a very specific story." The tray in Lila's hands began to shake. She wanted to run, to flee, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Those are punishment scars, Lila, the kind given to Omegas who displeased their alphas, the kind that mark you as damaged, as someone who couldn't fulfill their most basic duties. Is that what you're running from? Did your previous alpha cast you out for being defective?" "Stop." The word came out as a growl, Lila's wolf pushing forward with protective fury. She'd spent 6 years accepting Sina's petty cruelties, her casual dismissals and cutting remarks. But this was different. This was an attack on the deepest wounds Lila carried, the trauma she'd survived through sheer desperate will. "Or maybe it was worse than that," Sina continued, clearly enjoying Lila's distress. "Maybe you were rejected by a mate. Maybe you failed to give him children and he punished you for it. Is that why you're so eager to play mother to life? Because you couldn't have pups of your own?" Something inside snapped. The tray clattered to the floor, food scattering across the stone, and Lila found herself moving forward with her teeth bared and her wolf burning in her eyes. "You know nothing about what happened to me, nothing about what I survived. And if you ever speak about it again, if you ever threaten to expose something that isn't yours to share, I will make you regret it." Sina stumbled backward, genuine fear flashing across her face. For just a moment, Lila saw herself through the other Omega's eyes, saw the feral rage that had transformed her from submissive servant to something dangerous. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "What is going on here?" Dorian stood at the end of the corridor, his massive frame backlit by torches, his expression thunderous. He must have come from the training grounds, because he was still in fighting leathers, and the scent of snow and exertion clung to him. His ice-blue eyes moved from Sina to Lila to the scattered food on the floor, taking in the scene with the sharp assessment of a warrior. Sina immediately dropped into a submissive posture, her head bowed. "Alpha King, I apologize. I was just speaking with Lila, and there was an accident with the tray." "An accident?" Dorian's voice was flat, disbelieving. He moved closer, and Lila could feel the power radiating from him, the barely controlled fury of an alpha who knew something was wrong. "Lila, what happened?" Lila's throat was tight. She wanted to lie, to smooth this over and avoid the confrontation that would come from telling the truth. But she'd never been able to lie to direct authority, and Dorian's command presence made honesty feel inevitable. "Sina was making accusations about my past," she said quietly, "about why I came to this pack 6 years ago. She suggested that I was using Leaf to position myself, and she threatened to share information about me that she had no right to discover." Dorian's jaw tightened. "What information?" "It doesn't matter, Alpha King. It's personal, and it has no bearing on my ability to care for your son." If it's causing conflict in my pack, it matters. Dorian turned his attention to Sina, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. What did you say to her? Sina's face had gone pale. I only suggested that perhaps we should know more about her background, Alpha King. She came here with no references, no pack willing to vouch for her. For someone in such a position of trust with your son, shouldn't we know what she's running from? That decision is mine to make, not yours. And I notice you didn't answer my question. What specifically did you say to her? Sina's mouth opened and closed. She clearly hadn't expected to be challenged so directly, hadn't anticipated that Dorian would care about the details of an argument between Omegas. I may have mentioned that I'd seen scars on her arms, old injuries that suggested she'd been punished by a previous alpha. I only thought you should know, in case it indicated that she was unsuitable. You saw scars on her body without her consent or knowledge, and then used that information to attack her. Dorian's voice had gone dangerously quiet. You violated her privacy and then weaponized her trauma against her. Is that an accurate summary? I was only trying to protect. Answer the question. Sina flinched. Yes, Alpha King. Get out of my sight. Report to Ininga for reassignment. You're no longer welcome in the main house. Sina's face crumpled. But Alpha King, I was only... Now. The command was absolute. Sina fled down the corridor, her expensive gown swirling around her, and Lila was left alone with Dorian and the scattered remains of Leif's dinner. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lila kept her eyes down, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd revealed too much, let her control slip, and now Dorian knew there were secrets in her past, scars that told stories she'd never wanted to share. Look at me, Dorian said finally, his voice gentler than it had been with Sina, but still carrying unmistakable authority. Lila raised her eyes slowly. Dorian's expression had shifted from fury to something more complex, something that looked almost like concern. She was telling the truth about the scars, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Alpha King. Will you show me? Lila's breath caught. Please, don't ask me to do that. I'm not commanding you, I'm asking. But Lila, if you're carrying trauma from abuse, I need to know, not because it makes you unsuitable to care for Leif, but because I need to understand what you've survived, what you might need support to heal from. The gentleness in his voice was almost harder to bear than anger would have been. Lila felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She'd promised herself 6 years ago that she would never cry over this again, never let what had been done to her reduce her to tears. But Dorian was waiting, patient and immovable, and she realized that this moment had been inevitable from the start. You couldn't build something real on a foundation of secrets. Eventually, the truth demanded to be seen. With shaking hands, Lila set down the fallen tray properly, then slowly rolled up her left sleeve. The scars were visible immediately, pale lines against her skin where burns had healed badly. There were dozens of them, some small and some large, creating a pattern that spoke of deliberate, repeated torture. She heard Dorian's sharp intake of breath but didn't look at his face. She couldn't bear to see disgust or pity there. Instead, she rolled up her right sleeve, revealing more of the same, burns and cuts, some that had been stitched poorly and left thick ridges of scar tissue. How? Dorian's voice was rough, barely controlled. Who did this to you? My previous alpha, Lila said quietly. Alpha Ragnar of the Ironwood Pack. I was his Omega, assigned to his household when I was 18. He was cruel to all his Omegas, but especially to me because I had healer training. because I could read and write and think for myself. He said I was too proud, that I needed to be taught my place. This is how he taught me. The burns came from hot irons, the cuts from knives. The words came out like gravel, sharp and cutting. He would punish me for small infractions, for speaking out of turn, or meeting his eyes or questioning his orders. He said pain would make me submissive, would break my spirit and make me the perfect Omega. Lila's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. It went on for 2 years, and then one night he went too far. He burned my back so badly that I couldn't stand, couldn't work. The pack healer said I might die from infection. But you survived. Yes. And when I was strong enough to walk, I ran. I left everything behind and traveled for weeks, until I was far enough away that Ragnar wouldn't bother to track me. I came here because the Frostborn pack was known for being strong and stable, and I thought I could disappear into the lowest ranks and finally be safe. Dorian was silent for a long moment. When Lila finally gathered the courage to look at his face, she saw an expression of such cold fury that she instinctively took a step back. "Don't," he said immediately. "Don't fear me. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the monster who did this to you and at myself for not knowing, for not asking questions when you arrived 6 years ago with nothing. You had no reason to ask questions. I was just another Omega seeking pack membership. There are always Omegas seeking membership. But you weren't just another Omega. You had healer training, education, skills that should have been valued. Instead, you were placed in the kitchens and treated as disposable." Dorian moved closer, and Lila could feel the heat radiating from him, the barely leashed power of his wolf. "Ragnar of the Ironwood Pack. I know him. We've had dealings over territory borders. He's always struck me as arrogant and cruel, but I didn't know the extent of his brutality. It doesn't matter now. I'm here and he's there, and I've built a life where I'm safe from him. It does matter." Dorian reached out slowly, giving Lila time to pull away, and gently touched one of the scars on her forearm. His fingers were warm, and his touch was so careful it made her throat tight. "This matters because it was done to you, because you survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side still kind, still capable of caring for my son, with such patience and gentleness. That strength deserves to be acknowledged." Lila couldn't speak. No one had ever called her strong before. Damaged, yes. Broken, certainly. But never strong. "I want to kill him," Dorian continued, his voice dropping to a growl that made his wolf evident. "I want to travel to the Ironwood Pack and challenge him for what he did to you. For every scar, every moment of pain, every night you spent in terror." "You can't," Lila said quickly. "It would cause problems between the packs, and it's not worth it. I'm not worth starting a conflict over." "You are worth it." Dorian's eyes blazed with conviction. "You are worth protecting, worth defending, worth going to war for if necessary, and I need you to understand that, Lila. You are not disposable. You are not damaged goods. You are a survivor who deserves safety and respect, and the chance to heal." The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. She tried to wipe them away, humiliated by the show of weakness. But Dorian caught her hands gently. "It's all right to cry," he said. "It's all right to feel this. You've been carrying it alone for 6 years, and that's too long to bear such weight without support." "I don't know how to accept support," Lila admitted through her tears. "I don't know how to trust that it won't be used against me later." "Then we'll learn together, because I'm not going to let you face this alone anymore." Dorian released her hands and stepped back, giving her space to breathe. For now, let me get someone to bring fresh food for Leaf. You should go sit with him. He's probably worried about why his dinner is late." "Alpha King." "Dorian," he interrupted. "When we're in private, you can call me Dorian. I think we're past the point of pure formality." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. She rolled her sleeves back down carefully and made her way to Leif's chambers on shaking legs. The boy looked up from his book when she entered, his expression immediately concerned. "Lila, what's wrong? I heard voices in the corridor." "Just a small problem, but your father handled it." Lila settled into her usual chair and tried to compose herself. "Your dinner will be here soon. There was an accident with the tray." Leif studied her face with uncomfortable perception. "Someone was mean to you." "It's been dealt with." "Was it because of me? Because you're taking care of me instead of doing normal Omega duties?" "No," Lila said firmly. "It was because some people are cruel and they look for excuses to hurt others. But it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own insecurities." Leif was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took Lila's hand. His grip was surprisingly strong for a boy his size. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "Even if other people are mean about it, you make things better." Lila squeezed his hand gently, her heart full of affection for this brave, kind child. "You make things better, too." They sat together in comfortable silence until a servant arrived with fresh food. Dorian came shortly after, his expression still dark but controlled. He helped Lila serve Leif's dinner, and the three of them ate together, while Leif chattered about the book he was reading. It felt almost normal, almost like family, and for the first time in 6 years, Lila let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have this, could have safety and purpose and people who cared about her, not despite her scars, but including them, accepting her as a whole person rather than damaged goods. Later that night, after Leif was settled for sleep, Dorian walked Lila to her chamber door. They stood in the quiet corridor, the torches burning low, and the rest of the household settling into rest. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Dorian said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for listening, for not seeing me differently because of it." "I do see you differently," Dorian corrected, "but not in the way you fear. I see you as stronger than I realized, as someone who survived things that would destroy most people and who still has the capacity for kindness and care. That's remarkable, Lila." She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. Dorian reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Sleep well," he said. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next, about how to ensure you're truly safe here, and about what we can do to help you heal." He left before Lila could respond, his footsteps fading down the corridor. She entered her chamber and closed the door, then leaned against it with her heart racing. Everything had changed. Her secrets were exposed, her scars revealed, and instead of rejection or disgust, she'd found understanding and protection. Dorian had called her strong, had promised to help her heal, and had looked at her with something in his eyes that made her wolf stir with cautious hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. And as she prepared for bed, she realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could retreat back into safety and solitude, or she could step forward into the unknown and see what might grow from this fragile new trust. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and snow continued to fall in thick curtains. But inside, the fire burned warm, and for the first time since she'd fled the Ironwood Pack 6 years ago, Lila felt the possibility of genuine safety settling around her like a protective cloak. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications. But tonight, she let herself rest in the knowledge that she was not alone, and that someone powerful enough to protect her had chosen to do so. It was more than she dared to hope for in 6 long years, and it was enough for now to let her sleep peacefully through the winter night. The morning after her confrontation with Sina, Lila woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a note in Dorian's strong handwriting, asking her to meet him in his private study after Leif's morning exercises were complete. The formality of the written request made her nervous, though she tried to push the anxiety aside as she went through her usual routine with Leif. The boy was in good spirits, chattering about a dream he'd had where he could run through the forest without his legs hurting. Lila listened and encouraged him while working the salve into his muscles, noting with satisfaction that the swelling had decreased noticeably over the past few weeks. The treatment was working, slowly but surely, and Leif's range of motion had improved enough that he could stand for longer periods without pain. "You're getting stronger," she told him as they finished. "I think we should start adding some weight-bearing exercises soon. Nothing strenuous, but enough to build up the muscles that support your legs." "Really?" Leif's face lit up with hope. "Do you think I'll be able to walk normally someday? Maybe even run?" "I think you have a very good chance," Lila said carefully. She didn't want to promise what she couldn't guarantee, but the progress was undeniable. "Your body is responding well to the treatment, and you're young enough that your bones and muscles can still adapt. It will take time and consistent work, but yes, I believe you can improve significantly." Leif threw his arms around her in an impulsive hug, and Lila found herself holding him close, her heart swelling with affection for this brave child who'd endured so much pain with such grace. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, for believing I could get better when everyone else just felt sorry for me." "You never needed pity," Lila said firmly. "You needed proper care and someone willing to put in the work. You're doing all the hard parts yourself, Leif. I'm just guiding you through it." After settling Leif with his books and a promise to return for lunch, Lila made her way to Dorian's study. She'd never been inside before, and she paused at the heavy wooden door, gathering her courage before knocking. "Come in," Dorian's voice called. The study was smaller than she'd expected, lined with shelves holding books and maps and various artifacts. A large desk dominated one corner, covered in correspondence and documents, while a seating area near the fireplace offered more comfortable chairs. Dorian stood by the window, looking out over the snow-covered training grounds, but he turned when she entered. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chairs by the fire. "Please, sit. This isn't a formal meeting. I just wanted to speak with you privately." Lila settled into one of the chairs, acutely aware of how different this felt from their previous interactions. There was an intimacy to being in his private space, surrounded by his belongings and his scent, that made her wolf stir with interest. Dorian took the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his blonde hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years carrying heavy responsibility. He looked tired, she realized, and wondered how much sleep he'd gotten after the confrontation with Sina. "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday," he began, "about what you survived with Alpha Ragnar, and I've been thinking about how you've lived here for 6 years, without anyone knowing, without anyone offering you proper support or recognition for your skills." "I didn't want recognition," Lila said quietly. "I wanted to disappear." "I understand that, but disappearing meant you were undervalued, placed in positions below your abilities, and left vulnerable to people like Sina, who saw you as an easy target. Dorian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. That ends now. I'm making changes to ensure you're properly protected and properly valued in this pack. What kind of changes? First, I'm officially appointing you as Leaf's personal healer and tutor. It won't be a temporary assignment anymore, but a permanent position with appropriate quarters, compensation, and status. You'll answer directly to me, and anyone who questions your authority or your place here will answer to me as well. Lila's breath caught. Alpha King, that's too much. I don't need special treatment. I just need to be left alone to do my work. It's not special treatment. It's recognition of your value and protection of your position. And there's more. Dorian's ice-blue eyes held hers steadily. I've sent a message to Alpha Ragnar of the Ironwood Pack. I've informed him that you are under my personal protection as a valued member of the Frostborn Pack, and that any attempt to reclaim you or interfere with your life here will be considered an act of war against my territory. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. You didn't. Dorian, you can't threaten war over me. It's not worth the risk. You are worth the risk, Dorian said firmly. And it's not a threat. It's a statement of fact. Ragnar abused you, tortured you, and you fled for your life. You sought sanctuary in my pack, and I failed to provide it adequately for 6 years. That changes now. You are under my protection, formally and officially, and Ragnar will know that if he comes for you, he'll face the full might of the Frostborn Pack. He won't come for me, Lila said, though her voice shook. I'm not important enough for him to bother with. He probably replaced me within days of my leaving. Perhaps. But now there will be no question. No possibility of him deciding 6 years later that he wants to make an example of you. You're safe here, Lila. Truly safe in a way you haven't been since you arrived. Lila didn't realize she was crying until Dorian moved from his chair to kneel in front of hers, his large hands gently gripping her shoulders. I'm sorry, she managed. I don't know why I'm crying. I should be grateful, not falling apart. You're crying because you've been carrying the fear of him finding you for 6 years, and now that weight is lifted. That's not falling apart. That's releasing what you've been holding too long. Dorian's thumbs brushed away her tears with surprising gentleness. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to grieve for what was done to you, and to feel relief that it's truly over. I don't know how to be safe, Lila admitted through her tears. I've spent so long just surviving, just trying to stay invisible and avoid attention. I don't know how to accept protection or believe that it won't be taken away. Then we'll learn together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, and I'll prove to you that this is real, that you can trust it. Dorian's expression softened. I need you to understand something, Lila. What I feel for you, what my wolf recognizes in you, it's not just about protecting someone vulnerable. It's more than that. Lila's heart began to pound. What do you mean? I think you know what I mean. I think you've felt it too. The pull between us, the way my wolf settles when you're near, the way I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to ensure your happiness and safety above all else. The mate bond, Lila whispered. She'd been trying not to acknowledge it, trying not to hope, but the truth had been growing undeniable over the past weeks. The way her wolf responded to Dorian's presence, the sense of rightness she felt when they were together, the pull that made her want to be near him even when common sense said she should maintain distance. Yes, the mate bond, Oh, Dorian's hand slid from her shoulders to gently cup her face. I felt it the first time I really looked at you, when you stood in my office and defended your right to care for Leaf. It was like something clicked into place, something I'd been missing without knowing it, and it's only grown stronger since then. But you're the Alpha King, Lila said, her voice breaking, and I'm just an Omega with a traumatic past and scars all over my body. You could have anyone, someone whole and undamaged and worthy of your status. You are whole, Dorian said fiercely. Your scars don't make you less, they make you a survivor. And you are absolutely worthy, Lila, worthy of respect and care and love, worthy of being my mate if you'll have me. I don't understand why you'd want me, because you're strong and kind and brave, because you care for my son with such patience and dedication, because you've survived horrors that would break most people, and you came out the other side still capable of gentleness. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in years. Dorian's thumb stroked her cheeks gently. Because my wolf recognizes you as mine, and everything in me wants to claim you and protect you and build a life with you. I'm afraid, Lila admitted. I'm afraid of trusting this, of believing it's real and then having it ripped away. I'm afraid that I'm too damaged to be a good mate, that my past will always be a shadow over us. Your past is part of you, but it doesn't define you. And I'm not asking you to trust perfectly or to have no fear. I'm just asking you to give this a chance, to let me prove that I'm worthy of your trust, that I'll protect you and value you and never use your vulnerability against you. Lila searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden cruelty, but all she saw was sincerity and a tenderness that made her chest ache with longing. Dorian was offering her everything she'd thought she could never have, safety and status, and a mate who looked at her like she was precious. I want to say yes, she whispered, but I need time. I need to know that this is real, that it will last. Can you give me that? I can give you all the time you need, Dorian promised. We'll take this slowly, at whatever pace feels right to you. There's no rush, no pressure, just the two of us learning to trust each other and build something real. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his forehead to hers. The gesture was intimate, without being demanding, a connection that felt both grounding and electric. Lila closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the mate bond humming between them like a living thing, warm and steady and full of promise. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, until a knock at the door made them both pull back. Dorian stood and called for whoever it was to enter, and Ininga, the head of household, stepped inside. Alpha, King, I apologize for interrupting, but there's a situation that requires your attention. One of the border patrols has reported unusual activity near the Eastern Territory line. Dorian's expression shifted immediately to alert focus. What kind of activity? Unknown wolves, possibly scouts from another pack. They haven't crossed into our territory yet, but they're watching our borders closely. I'll be there immediately. Dorian turned to Lila. I'm sorry. I need to handle this. But we'll continue this conversation later. And Lila, everything I said stands. You're under my protection, and I meant every word about what I feel for you. Lila nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Dorian squeezed her hand once, a gesture of reassurance, and then followed Ininga out of the study. Left alone, Lila sank back into the chair and tried to process everything that had just happened. Dorian had claimed her as his mate, had offered her protection and status, and a future she'd never dared to imagine. He'd sent a message to Ragnar, formally declaring her off limits, removing the threat that had haunted her for 6 years. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through her duties with Leaf mechanically, while her mind spun with possibilities and fears. The boy noticed her distraction and asked if she was all right, and she managed to reassure him without revealing the full truth. She wasn't ready to tell Leaf about the mate bond yet, not until she was certain it would last, not until she could trust that this wasn't a dream that would shatter at the first sign of trouble. That evening, after Leif was settled for sleep, Lila stood at her window and looked out over the snow-covered landscape. The winter night was clear, stars brilliant against the dark sky, and somewhere out there, Dorian was dealing with potential threats to his territory. She found herself worrying about him, wanting him to return safely, and realized with a start that this was what it meant to have a mate, to care about someone else's safety as much as your own, to feel their absence like a missing piece of yourself. It was past midnight when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room. A soft knock came at her door, and when she opened it, Dorian stood there, still in his outdoor furs, snow melting in his blonde hair. "Is everything all right?" she asked immediately. "The border situation? Handled. It was scouts from a neighboring pack testing our vigilance. We sent them away with a clear message about respecting our territory." Dorian's expression softened. "I'm sorry for interrupting our conversation earlier. I wanted to make sure you were all right before I retired for the night." "I'm all right, just thinking about everything you said, everything that's changing. Is it too much? I can slow down if you need me to." "No," Lila said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It's not too much. It's just new, and I'm still learning to believe it's real. But I want this, Dorian. I want to try." The smile that spread across Dorian's face was like sunrise breaking through winter clouds. "Then we'll try together, one day at a time." He reached out and took her hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was courtly and tender, and it made Lila's heart flutter with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Sleep well," Dorian said softly. "Tomorrow we'll start building our future together." He left before she could respond, but Lila stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the space where he'd been and feeling the mate bond pulse with warmth and promise. For the first time in 6 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this, deserved safety and love and a future that held more than just survival. Outside, the winter wind sang through the trees, and snow continued to fall in soft curtains. But inside, Lila felt the warmth of possibility settling around her like a protective embrace, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone anymore. The healing had begun, slow and steady, and though the scars would always remain, they no longer defined her. She was Lila, healer and survivor, mate to an alpha king and caretaker to a brave young boy who needed her. She was valued and protected and chosen, and that was enough to let her sleep peacefully, dreaming of a future bright with promise and hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how vulnerability can become a bridge to true connection rather than a weakness to be hidden. If stories of survival, healing, and found family speak to your heart, please subscribe and join our pack for more tales of courage in the face of darkness. Remember that the scars we carry are not marks of damage, but proof of battle survived. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us fully and trust that we are worthy of love, exactly as we